Welcome back to another episode of the Next Level Minds podcast. My name is Chris Chapman, and I am your host. If this is your first time tuning in, then this is a podcast dedicated to those who want to reach a next level in their faith, family, fitness, finances, and embrace the American freedoms that we have in this great country. We have a mission here, and it's really to impact over 1 million people. So if you have not done this already, please take the time to subscribe to Next Level Minds on Apple Podcast. Share this episode with a family member, friend, or colleague, and then leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Let me know what you think. Other than that, we have different frameworks we do with these episodes. We do some interview-based episodes where we talk with different individuals on how they have built a successful life when it comes to faith, family, fitness, finances, and embraced American freedoms. And then we also do a number of different solo episodes, which I've done a lot more of those recently because, frankly, they seem to be very popular, little 10 to 20 minute episodes that people can listen to, you know, on a walk, in the gym, on their commute to work, things of that nature. So that's what we're going to do today. And it's really going to be the concept of strong men versus weak men. And the reason that I wanted to create this episode is I just got back from a men's retreat through my church here in Charleston, and it's the third year that I've gone on this men's retreat, and I was very blessed to have had my dad go with me. He's gone in the past, I've gone in the past, but we've never had the opportunity to go together, so that was a tremendous opportunity. So quick little message there. If you are listening to this and your dad is still around and you're blessed to have your dad in your life, then do something with him. A weekend trip, a golf trip, go out to dinner, because unfortunately that time's not going to be there forever. So you might as well maximize it while you have the opportunity. But anyway, got back from this retreat and said, you know what? I think a good episode would be strong men versus weak men. And I'm not really going to take any learning lessons from that weekend, because not that I didn't get a lot out of it, but I don't want to take anything from the speaker and his credibility. And then we had breakout groups, but usually the things that are said in those breakout groups are different challenges and things of that nature that people are dealing with. And they obviously usually stay within that room. Not trying to expose anyone else's challenges, issues, things like that. So I figured, you know what, let me just off the top of my head, go into a couple different sections, right? The biblical standard of being a strong man, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what are the weak men in modern culture? What do they have? We're going to talk about kind of the contrast between what weak men have and then what strong men should do. And then we're going to also talk about how to become a strong man. Like, what are the habits, the opportunities, the things that you can do? And then we're also going to talk about some other personal reflection moments at the end about maybe a couple times in my life where I've stood up, and also maybe a couple learning lessons as well. So let's start with section 1, as I mentioned, right? What is the biblical standard of a strong man? Before I go into this, I do want to mention that the more I read the Bible, the more I feel as if I'm equipped to lead my family, right? And God calls us to be spiritual leaders as men for our household, right? The pastor of your church is not the spiritual leader of your home, right? The guy you look up to is not the spiritual leader of your home. You, as a man, if you're listening to this, are the spiritual leader of your household, right? And how can you become more equipped to be a spiritual leader of your household? And that's diving into the Bible, diving into the bread of life, the Word of God, and allowing it to fill you up and overflow into your life, which will then help you when it comes to how you act, how you behave, how you treat others, things like that, right? And so speaking of the Bible, one of the verses that really sticks out to me when it comes to being a biblical standard of a strong man, it's 1 Corinthians 16:13, which says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, right? And the reason that I think they start out by saying, Paul starts out here when he writes Corinthians and says, be watchful, right? Because there's another verse in the Bible that says the devil prowls along like a roaring lion looking to devour its prey, right? We as men have temptations, right? We have temptations of lust, right? Of porn, of looking at another woman. And we have temptations of alcohol, right? We have temptations of drugs, right? Not saying that if you're listening to this, you have those, but if you look up online, like the struggles and temptations that men deal with, you're going to see things like lust, alcohol, anger, these kind of commonalities, right? And so I believe that's why Paul says, be watchful, right? Look around for things that are distracting you. Look around from things that are pulling you away from being the man that you should be and that you know you could be, and then stand firm in the faith, right? So first off, be watchful. Very important here. Be watchful. The devil prowls along like a roaring lion. And then it says, okay, that's step one, right? And then it says, stand firm in the faith, right? Stand firm in the faith. What does that mean? Well, stand firm in your faith, right? Reading the Bible, go to church, surround yourself with like-minded believers, learn from them, right? Take the time to grow in your faith by spending time in the word, right? You value what you invest in, and you invest in what you value, right? So if this is something you value, you got to spend your time, energy, and effort doing it. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, right? What does it mean to be acting like men? Well, it means to be responsible. It means to have courage. It means to lead. It means to have integrity, right? It means to act like somebody who sets the example for others around you, right? We've talked about this before. Set the example for others around you and the importance of doing that, and then be strong, right? It's not optional. Not just physically strong, but be mentally strong, mentally strong, spiritually strong, financially strong, well-rounded individuals. 1 Corinthians 16:13, right? Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Joshua 1:9, going back to the Old Testament, says, be strong and courageous, right? Examples of strong men in Scripture, right? You have David, who faced Goliath with the freaking slingshot, right? You have Job, who maintained integrity under suffering, right? Job was a very, very, very wealthy individual, right? He'd be considered like your one percenters. For the folks in Charleston, he probably would have had a nice place on Daniel Island, which is an awesome place that I'd love to live. Anyway, he got everything taken from him, right? And under that time, he had his family taken away, he had his wealth taken away. Like, he had every single thing he had pretty much stripped, right? And first off, to me, there's a learning lesson there that says the things of this world are temporary. And he continued to trust in God. He continued to lean into his faith. And, it worked out extremely well for him. I'll let you guys read the story there. But he maintained integrity. He maintained strength. And he maintained, most importantly, staying power. Staying power, right? Staying put in the situation when things go bad. So how much better would your life look if when things go south, right? Maybe you've had a tough moment in your job, a tough moment in your relationship, a tough moment with your kids. And instead of running from your problems by looking for another job, or if you're in a season of having difficulty in your marriage, instead of looking elsewhere or doing the easy route, or if you've had not good relationships with your kids, and instead of just letting it happen and putting temporary band-aids over it, what if you had staying power and maintained integrity under the suffering, right? Because suffering is part of life, right? You can't get away from it. You can't avoid it. And you cannot get out of it, right? And James chapter 1, verse 2 through 4, they essentially say, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood that test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him, right? Trials will happen, situations will happen, suffering will happen. Learn to adapt, learn to have integrity. And then somebody like Jesus, right? Like Jesus, I feel like in some way, books outside of the Bible and maybe like movies and stuff, in some movies, he's depicted as this like soft individual who's just kind of go with the flow, hippie-like. And that is entirely not true. Like, he spoke boldly. You should, like, the things that he told the Pharisees, he called them fools. He called them like vipers. He called them evil, right? He spoke the truth boldly. He flipped tables, right? He was like, no, this is not happening here. He caused a ruckus, right? He carried the cross, right? Like, he was an awesome dude who stood up boldly, right? And so ask yourself, in this day and age, when it seems like every day is getting crazier and crazier, how can you speak boldly? How can you stand up for what's right, even though it may cost you something? So what is the summary of this section here? What's biblical strength? Well, it's having courage, it's having discipline, it's having obedience, and it's being able to adapt and push through your suffering, right? Going into the next section here, who and essentially what are weak men in modern culture? Well, the weak men in modern culture, what it really looks like is that they're emotionally reactive, right? You see them react emotionally very quickly. They're addicted to comfort, right? They're addicted to ordering on DoorDash. They're addicted to doing the easy route, their phone, Instagram, Facebook. They're just sucked into that. They play the blame game, right? They have that victim mentality of why me, or, life's not fair because of insert 1,000 excuses here. They avoid hard conversations, and they avoid hard and difficult circumstances, right? And they consume more than they produce. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, but I believe society wants us to be weak, right? Society wants us to be overweight. Society wants us to be broke. Society wants us to be emotionally unstable. Society wants us to be addicted to comfort. Why? Because when you're addicted to comfort, you're overweight, you're fueled up on medicine, big pharma benefits, the banks benefit, big food benefits, everyone but you benefits, right? And so rebel against that, right? Stop making excuses, because weak men make excuses. Strong men, like the ones hopefully listening to this episode, are the ones who are going to execute, right? Victims complain and play the victim mentality, whereas men adjust, move on, accept responsibility, and move forward. Stop making excuses and go build the life that you want to actually live. So, strong men, right, versus weak men. We're going to go check by check by check, and I think this will really help you, right? Weak men in today's society, right, they avoid responsibility, they seek comfort, they blame, they quit when it gets hard. Versus strong men, they lead, they control their emotions, right? They control their anger. I've seen some men who look strong on the outside, but then on the inside, they're angry and they react in an angry situation. If you're a man and you're like cursing up a storm and you're getting mad, it's really, something that you should work on, and something honestly like I need to work on sometimes. Like if I get caught up in traffic, sometimes I drop some words that I shouldn't say. But, the Bible mentions in Matthew, I believe, I think it's like Matthew 11 or Matthew 10, maybe a little bit after that. But from my understanding, I'm paraphrasing here. It's basically saying like there will come a time in your life where you will have to account for every essentially like negative word that you've said, right? And essentially it's saying like times that you've sworn or gotten angry, you'll have to account for that. And there's also another Bible verse out there when it comes to anger. I believe it's also James as well, where James is talking about how you should be slow to speak. James 1:19. Let every man be quick to listen, but slow to use his tongue, and slow to lose his temper. For man's temper is never the means of achieving God's true goodness. Is kind of the meaning behind that, right? And so ask yourself, like with that checklist, am I somebody who's avoiding responsibility, who's seeking comfort, who's quitting when it gets hard? Or am I somebody who's leading, who's controlling my emotions, who's providing, right, financially, who's protecting physically and mentally, spiritually sound? Am I somebody who's sharpening their mind? Am I somebody who's spiritually leading my household? Am I somebody who has integrity and I'm keeping promises to myself? Am I somebody that other men can look up to, right? These are questions you should be asking yourself. And if you're listening to this episode and you're like, okay, that's great. Like, I want to become a strong man. I have some areas that I need to work on. What are some things that you can do? Well, I think there's 4 things you can do. There's the physical side, right? So working out multiple times a week. I like to do 4 lifts a week and about 3 runs a week, right? So I like to run, I like to do lifts, and then actually I walk pretty much every day, right? You don't have to go that crazy, but at least get your butt in the gym 2 or 3 days a week and go on 1 or 2 runs a week. Your body will thank you. Train consistently, right? Just have a consistent measure of, every day I'm going to move my body. Eat intentionally, right? I like to do, I kind of call it like the 90-10 method. So 90% of like actually really locked in of, for example, breakfast would be something like eggs and some ground beef and maybe like some cottage cheese. And then, a snack, maybe like a protein shake, right? And then lunch may be a grilled chicken wrap with some cheese on there and some lettuce. And then a snack after that may be a protein bar or, an apple with some cut up bananas and a yogurt or something, right? And then dinner may be equally as healthy, right? Like some ground turkey, some vegetables, some cut up potatoes, stuff like that, right? That is majority, that kind of diet is majority of what I eat, right? But then I also kind of have the 10% of, you know what, like I'm just going to eat whatever. And that could be, maybe going to Home Team Barbecue and getting a barbecue sandwich with tots and putting, a bunch of barbecue sauce on it, right? Am I eating that every day? No. Am I eating that once a week? Honestly, not even really once a week. That's like a once every 2 week kind of thing. So eat intentionally, right? And then train your body, right? So audit yourself. Train your mind. What are you putting into your mind? Like, are you watching the fake news media, or are you listening to productive podcast? Are you watching, the 100th Netflix series that you've been watching for the last, X amount of years? Or are you watching maybe a YouTube video on how to better your life and, insert area here? Audit what you're putting in your mind, equally as important. Spiritual leadership, right? What does that look like? Daily time with the Lord, daily scripture, daily prayer, surrounding yourself with brothers and sisters in Christ that can lift you up, that can develop you, make you an even better person. Again, you are the spiritual leader of your household. And radical ownership, right? What does that mean? Well, it's no blaming, no victim talk. Everything in your life is your responsibility. So, I'm thinking about my year last year. I had an okay year. For those of you who don't know, I'm in sales. And some of actually a large clientele in my book of business is federal government related. So when there was some cuts that were happening last year and the government spending, and me personally, again, this is my personal opinion, I think the government spends way too much money. I think we pay way too much in taxes. So, yes, it did have some cuts and it did impact my book of business, and I made a little bit less money than I wanted. But at the same time, like, I'm tired of paying over 50% of taxes. When I say 50%, if you add up your property tax, your sales tax, your capital gains tax, your dividend tax, your W-2, all this stuff, like, you're paying over 50%, which, hey, to me, that's slavery. Anyway, I digress on that point, but I didn't have as good of a year as I'd hoped for, and I could have played the blame game. Oh, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And, honestly, I did find myself doing that a couple times. But at the end of the day, I could have worked a little bit harder. I could have worked a little bit longer. I could have not taken, X amount of days off. I could have, not left a little early on a Friday here or there to go to the driving range. Like, stop playing the blame game. It's all on you. Hey, if I really wanted to, I could have worked extremely hard Monday through Friday and even spent time prospecting on Saturday morning on my computer. I feel as if I had a gun to my head and said, hey, if you don't make X amount of money, X amount of money is I'm just using that as a goal. If you don't make this money that you want by the end of the year, you're going to die. I would have figured it out. And I did not have that all or nothing mentality. And I believe that's really what it takes to hit your goals. It's truly I have no other option but to make this happen. Same with all your goals, right? Your financial goals, your personal goals, your fitness goals, all that stuff. And I did not have that all or nothing mentality. And frankly, I put that on me, right? So instead of putting the blame on somebody else, I'm going to put it on myself. Did I still work extremely hard? Yes, I put in a lot of work, but it's dude, honestly, could have worked some Saturdays and probably had an even better year than I did last year. But I just really didn't want to do anything on a Saturday. I wanted to enjoy my weekend, right? But again, if it was do or die, I could have done what I needed to do. So ask yourself, if you didn't achieve a goal, don't play the blame game. Put the blame back on yourself because you're in control of your life. Of course, Jesus has a plan for your life, but you're in control of all the actions, behaviors that you take. Continue to take ownership, right, of the good and the bad. If your marriage isn't how you want, or your finances aren't how you want, or your health isn't how you want, or your relationship with your kids isn't how you want, it's on you, right? It's on you. And then lastly, I think the other thing that I was going to touch on, I talked about this earlier, is don't overreact to situations, right? I think that's another strong point when it comes to just being a man is, if someone cuts you off in traffic or you're in an argument with your wife or girlfriend, take the time, step back. We as men, I feel like it's easy to get caught up in the moment, fueled with testosterone and all this stuff. Like, take the time to just step away from the situation. And I say that just because, like, there's been numerous times where I'm driving in traffic, and Charleston's crazy traffic. Too many people have moved here, and I'm just like, you mother, insert word here, and I'm mad for like 10 seconds in the car by myself. But it's like, did I really need to do that? No. So that's kind of what I want to leave you guys with: strong men versus weak men. Fortunately, I feel like the more weak men there are in society, the more chaos there will be. So if you're listening to this episode, this is a call to action to be a strong man, right? Avoid that comfort addiction, avoid, lack of discipline, and be somebody who, as Paul says in Corinthians, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Be somebody who can set the example for others, and be somebody that can be a go-to resource when people want to level up their life. You can be that person. You can be that man. Let's make it happen in 2026 and beyond. Otherwise, thank y'all for taking the time to listen to this week's episode of Next Level Minds. Appreciate all the support as well, and I hope everyone has a fantastic week ahead.